How you behave in a position of power actually says a lot about you. And I know part of this might be obvious because that probably conjures up images of corporate executives or politicians or whatever. But the other part of this that might not be so obvious is that you are in a position of power more often than you might realize. So if you are, say, a customer in a service-oriented environment, then you have the power because you're the customer. Or if you are something as simple as driving in a car, then you're more powerful than, say, a pedestrian. So let's go ahead and talk about both the right and wrong ways to use power and how that defines you. So put simply, the reason why your use of power says so much about you is because it enables you to do things that you couldn't otherwise do if you didn't have the power to do them. So you're showing your true colors in that way. So if you use your power to do the wrong thing, then you're saying a lot of negative things about your character. For one, you're saying that you are selfish because the outlook is if I can do something and get away with it, then that's the only thing that matters. There's not really any regard for the consequences that your actions might have on other people. Also, it says that you might be a little egomaniacal, especially if you believe that having power makes you fundamentally better than everybody else, because it really doesn't. There's a lot of luck and circumstance involved in rising to a position of power. Many people have held that position before you, many people will afterwards, and you could lose your power at any second and you'd still be the same person. So it really doesn't make you better than anybody else. And then another thing it says, amongst many others, is that you are kind of cowardly, because if you're only doing something knowing that there aren't going to be any consequences, then that implies that if there were to be consequences, then you'd be too afraid to face them. Now, on the other hand, if you use your power to do the right thing, then you say the exact opposite about your character. And that's the direction you really want to go if you ever want anybody to be able to trust you or respect you, and if you want to know at the end of every day that you truly are a genuine person. And so there are a number of things you have to do to achieve that. First of all, you have to exercise restraint. So whenever you're in a position of power, it's very easy to give into that temptation to just do something because you want to, because you can. Nothing's going to stop you, right? But that is not anywhere near a sufficient level of justification for you to do something. Instead, you've got to ask yourself, is this going to be for the betterment of the organization or for those around me, and so on. And that was actually a question that I had at the forefront of my mind whenever I went to make an executive decision as a platoon leader in the Army. I was always asking myself, why do I want to do this? Is it because it's going to be for the betterment of the organization, or is it just because I want to? And in the latter case, I gave it a second thought. The other thing you've got to do is treat others how you want to be treated. So a lot of people in positions of power will treat others that can't stand up to them disrespectfully and then expect those same people to turn around and treat them with respect. But that's a double standard, and it's not really fair to claim that if that's the way that you behave. So an example of this was when I was in the Army. Towards the end of my career, right before I got out, I worked for a battalion commander who was a particularly toxic person. And when I made a mistake, he wasted no time in talking down to me in a very disrespectful, degrading way. But I would venture to guess that he himself, just like anybody else, would not appreciate being treated that way. And yet here he was doing that same thing to me. So I lost a lot of respect for him as a result, and that told me everything I needed to know about his character. The third thing, amongst many others, that you have to do is be humble. So the exact opposite of one of the earlier talking points, which is don't assume that just because you have power, you are fundamentally better than anybody else, because you're not. At the end of every day, we are all human beings and no one is really better than anybody else. So an example of this would be if you go into, say, a restaurant and you start treating the waitstaff with disrespect and you're just rude to them because you can. And a lot of people have this assumption that it doesn't matter because they're just waitstaff, right? I can get away with it. They're going to be nice to me either way. But at the end of the day, when those waiters and waitresses take off their uniforms, they're human beings just like you. And so you have to treat them as such. So be ethical and responsible in your use of power, because if anything, the more power you have, the more severe the consequences of your actions. And just because someone isn't holding you accountable doesn't mean that you don't have to be held accountable. So at a minimum, treat waitstaff and others with respect. Don't be an entitled customer, right? And if applicable, if you have subordinates, treat them the way that you want to be treated. And for God's sake, stop at a crosswalk and treat pedestrians with respect when you're driving. So I hope this was helpful for you, and I'll see you next time.